All right, thank you. This presentation is about sharing some findings from a recent cross-media survey that we did in Southeast Asia. What I'm hoping from this is that the learnings from the study will be equally relevant to any advertiser or agency in the room who are looking at creating or understanding how to create media synergies across multimedia campaigns. Before I get into that though, first of all, I just want to spend a few minutes explaining to you why Yahoo did this study. First of all, I mean, Southeast Asia for Yahoo comprises 6 markets in terms of the markets which we operate in. Across the region, you're talking about in excess of 500 million people. Sure, there's a lot of complexities there in terms of the age profile of these markets, the cultural difference of these markets, and also the economic prosperity of these markets. But either way you look at it, there's a huge amount of opportunity within Southeast Asia. When you overlay that with internet penetration, and these purple bars represent the number of internet users on a monthly basis in millions across each of these countries. So currently there's 130 million regular internet users across Southeast Asia, which gives an average penetration, if you like, of 25%. Now a lot of that 25% is probably pulled down from Indonesia in terms of only having a relatively small number of people online, but this massive population. Fast forward this to 3 years' time. And this is where digital in terms of the online space is going to get really exciting from Southeast Asia. Not only are there a lot of people, but the growth rate year on year is actually quite high. So the projection by 2014, which isn't all that far away now, will be 184 million regular internet users in this region, which represents a penetration of 35%. As you can see, most of that most of that mass will come from the Philippines and Indonesia. So either way you look at it from Southeast Asia's perspective, it's a massive population, massive opportunity, and internet penetration is growing at a phenomenal rate. However, where's the challenge? Particularly from Yahoo's perspective, and also a lot of the other speakers who have spoken over the last day or so, is that online spend as a percentage of total spend is still the challenge. Low single digits. At least in Singapore, we probably have the benefit of the IAB, who calculated online ad spend in 2010 was 6% of total spend in Singapore. Go outside of Singapore and you're talking about online ad spend roughly 1 to maybe 3%. So putting that in context to say some of the more developed markets when you look outside of Asia, when you say US, UK, Germany, online ad spend is around about anywhere between 20 to 25% of total spend. Even within Asia, when you start to look at some of the big markets like Japan, Korea, the developed markets, Australia, you find that ad spend figure is something like 15-20%. So despite this enormous potential within Southeast Asia, there's still a challenge in terms of share shift, if you like, from some of the more traditional media to online. A lot of my sort of day-to-day dealings are probably with our salespeople, with their agencies, etc. In terms of understanding the barriers to online spend and trying to put up the proof points in terms of why people should spend more money online as opposed to traditional media. The barriers do differ enormously from some of the more developed markets in the region, like Malaysia, Singapore, through to some of the emerging markets. But if you want to sort of classify or put them into buckets, they fall into 3 buckets, if you like. One is around knowledge. That's not necessarily the human... Right? Can you hear me? Oh. Right. Not too sure how much you missed. Just this one? Okay. In terms of barriers, they fall basically into 3 different categories. I mean, first of all is knowledge. We're not necessarily talking just the human talent side of things. There's also some very complicated processes and time-consuming processes in terms of initiating or staging a digital campaign. The other thing is ingrained behaviors. There's almost a default mechanism in a lot of these markets and a lot of these countries to go to traditional agency. What we see more and more is a lot of people experimenting, trying to work out what works for them, but there's still this massive default in terms of going to traditional media. The third point, the one that I highlighted, is very much why I'm here today, in terms of probably putting forward some proof points of substantiating the effectiveness of online and how it will work with other medium. How it works? Oh, okay. I'm not too sure how much you've missed, but I'm assuming you're with me so far. So the third point is one that I'm really here today in terms of trying to talk about, the lack of proof points. When we talk to a lot of the agencies and our salespeople, there's this massive cry out in terms of case studies or finding proof points in terms of how digital works, where does it work, where does it not work. And the thing is, again, a lot of these people have their own sort of proof points, but not many people are prepared to really share it. So what we did is took an initiative earlier this year in terms of addressing this lack of proof points. So Yahoo's proposition to our key agency partners, key agency advertisers, was that Yahoo would fully fund a cross-media study. And it was the benefit, obviously, for the advertiser there is to get a very detailed report in terms of trying to understanding how their multimedia campaign worked and how to optimize it. The benefit for Yahoo is obviously to have forums like this where we can share a couple of the key slides from there, just to sort of give you some information in terms of how online can work with traditional media and how to identify where these media synergies are. So in this case, we're very thankful to an advertiser in the hair care category who partnered with us on this. The country happened to be Malaysia. There's no reason why it was Malaysia other than it was sort of the elected country with this advertiser. And we partnered with our research partners, Millward Brown, on this study. So for those of you who are not aware, I'll just give you a very brief overview in terms of how cross-media works. It really delivers in 4 areas. First and foremost, the key question is, was my campaign effective? Okay, so cross-media will actually talk to you from a campaign perspective whether that campaign was or was not effective. The second one, which is really interesting, starts to talk about the role that various media have on predefined brand metrics. Okay, so the campaign will have objectives, there'll be brand metrics which will be required in terms of getting lift or some points on it. And what cross-media does, it allows to understand which media moves which metrics. The other 2 points, one talks about cost efficiency. So we start to talk a bit of ROI. The second point's about effectiveness. The third point is about efficiency in terms of per dollar spent. And finally, once you understand that, it can be fairly not straightforward, but you can then sort of work out how to optimize the campaign if you were to do it again in that category, in that market. The methodology behind cross-media is extremely complicated. I think the key thing here to point out is it requires a massive sample. So for this particular study, we did 1,400 interviews, and the important thing here is to make the distinction between 2 waves. One is the pre-wave, one is the in-campaign wave. The pre-wave is there to actually understand or get a baseline, if you like. So before the campaign airs, what are the pre-existing attitudes and behaviors that are in that marketplace amongst that target audience? What that then allows you to do is isolate those existing attitudes and behaviors from the effect of the campaign. So basically the green one is where we measure all these pre-existing attitudes. The red one can be attributed to the campaign itself. The other point I want to make is that this in-campaign wave is incredibly complex in terms of how it works, but to sort of boil it down from a conceptual level, if you think about somebody who's been exposed to a online only, someone who's been exposed to TV only, someone who's been exposed to online and TV, you give them the same survey, you can start to understand the relative impact on brand metrics of the various media. It's not as simple as that, but that's conceptually how it works. So, first of all, how did my campaign perform? I'm going to hit you with a lot of data over the next sort of 5 minutes. So what I thought I'd do is just talk you through real data on one brand metric. This brand metric is purchase consideration. So I just want you to understand how these metrics are built up, and I think when I reveal all the data, hopefully it'll be a little bit clearer in terms of the interpretation. So we take purchase consideration or purchase intent. The score at the end of the campaign was around about 60-61%, the score in itself. But through that process I said before with the pre-wave, we're able to identify how much of that is actually pre-existing, if you like. Okay, so I mean these are obviously massive brands with multi-million dollars invested in them already. So the baseline was 56% on purchase consideration. Then through the modelling process that Millward Brown used, we're then able to sort of extract, if you like, things that are not directly related to the media. So talking about word of mouth, PR, those sorts of things. So that gets extracted from the overall mix as well. What you're finally left with is the uplift, if you like, from, say, purchase consideration that's directly attributable to the campaign. This campaign had 3 components: TV, magazine, and online. Okay? The other complexity here is based on the campaign objectives, we set those brand metrics up quite differently in terms of what the campaign's meant to do. For this campaign, one was about building awareness or presence. The other one I spoke to you before about was building up consideration or purchase intent, and there's also objectives there around building the imagery of this brand, and there are functional attributes and emotive attributes. So putting all that together, this is what we end up with. The red circle is the purchase consideration example I spoke to you before in terms of that lift that's directly attributable by the campaign, which is a 3.4%. But if you look across those 4 key brand metrics, the 4 key success points for this campaign, you can see that the lift is anywhere between sort of 3 and 5%. So at the overall level, if you start to look at Millward Brown's sort of normative database, for a category like this, in this sort of market, you'd probably expect a lift of anywhere between 2 to 3%. This lift was 3 to 5%. So first of all, a big tick in terms of the campaign being successful. The next one is starting to look at what role did each of the media play in driving these uplifts. Okay, so we're just looking at the uplifts now. That's the red portion of the bar, which is anywhere between 3 and 5%. Okay, so those percentages at the top are the same ones I showed before in terms of the red bar, but what Millward Brown are able to do now in terms of extracting how these media play a role. Okay, so you can see from first of all, just talking about it from the media perspective, first of all, if you take online, for example, there, you can see that online was very effective in terms of driving awareness and also purchase intent. The green bar is the lift that's attributable to TV. And you can see that whilst it played a role in terms of building awareness, its real core strength is still around building the imagery, both functional and emotive, for this brand in this market amongst this target market. The other point I want to point out, and this sort of comes back to the theme of the session, is creating media synergies. The pink portion at the top there is actually where TV and online have worked together, okay? So it's not just isolated in terms of what online does, isolated in terms of what TV does, but there's a synergistic effect as well, particularly when you look at TV and online. Not so much the case in terms of online and magazine, or even TV and magazine. This is exactly the same data that I'm showing you before, okay? So same numbers, it's 4 brand metrics, and the scores are exactly the same as well. So we've highlighted here that TV and online synergistically have an effect right across the board in terms of driving awareness, intent, and also the imagery. With the Yahoo hat on as well, I was very pleased to obviously see on the display side of things, because there was a social element as well, that display has come up very strong in terms of driving awareness and also purchase intent. This was from this particular case study, and I asked Millward Brown just sort of, how common is this finding in terms of, other case studies that they've got, and they sort of graciously shared with me another example. This example is from FMCG in North Asia, and exactly the same story comes up. I mean, I don't know the details behind this. TV is obviously very powerful in terms of driving some elements, but right across the board here, you see TV and online working together in synergy in terms of driving all of those key metrics. Now, that was all about effectiveness, okay, in terms of how effective are each of these media at driving these, brand metrics. Now we start to look at efficiencies, okay? So this is the ROI I was talking about before, the dollar for dollar spend. In this particular campaign that we measured, around about 80% of the spend was on TV, and the rest of the monies were evenly distributed between online and also magazine. Okay, here's another slide for you. Looks pretty heavy. Don't try and read the percentages across, it's not going to add up to 100. You read the percentages within each of those key brand metrics. So for example, take brand presence or brand awareness. What it's saying here is that on the dollar for dollar basis, that online is 15%, magazine 5%, so online was 3 times more effective on a dollar for dollar basis in terms of getting a lift on brand awareness. Also, as you can see there as well, online is, digital is particularly powerful in terms of driving consideration. But generally, right across the board, online is generally the most efficient media. Not necessarily the most effective, but the most efficient from a dollar-for-dollar basis. And finally, how can we optimize moving forward? Again, this gets very complicated in terms of what Millward Brown do to actually optimize the campaign, but it's a two-step process. First and foremost is to work out, this is like a TV response type of graph. First of all, it's to establish the effective frequency ceiling. So when you take an attribute such as functional imagery, you could do this for individual attributes if you wanted. What it starts to say is that for functional imagery, and in this case where we've mapped online and also TV, the horizontal axis talks about the number of exposures. On the vertical axis, you've actually got the percentage impact that is delivered. And this is sort of along the lines of the diminishing returns. So after 4 or 5 exposures to online, for functional imagery, you're starting to max out in terms of what the target market can take from being exposed. TV is a very similar case. It's obviously, so it gets up to about 50 exposures before it starts to reach these laws of diminishing returns. Okay? So this can be done on every single attribute, so awareness, consideration, individual attributes, in terms of how, at what point do diminishing returns kick in. You can then end up with a chart which looks a little bit like this. Again, depending on the brand metrics that you're trying to work on, what you want to take forward or learn. So we've got our awareness, we've got consideration, and even actually specific attributes by the different media. And it talks about the effective ceiling in each of those cells to maximize the takeout for that particular metric that's being driven. And you can see in this example here, from TV, for example, it's anywhere between 37 to sort of 60 exposures. For digital, it's anywhere between 4 and 10, depending on the brand metric that you're trying to drive. The actual frequency is from the study where the TV was overexposed, if you like, online was underexposed, and magazines were about right. From that, and I said before, it's all about optimizing how you take it forward. You can come up to this sort of analysis here. Remember before, once you know the frequency ceiling for each attribute, and this again is talking about functional imagery, you can see at which point in the campaign diminishing returns kick in. So up to week 5, 6, 7, if you look at the yellow bar, there is there's beneath that, everybody is beneath that frequency ceiling. As the campaign continues to roll, more and more people become above that frequency ceiling. So by the time you get to week 14 or week 15, you're talking about 40 or 50% of the target market are above that ceiling. That can then get extrapolated in terms of GRPs. So, if you like, it's talking about overexposure or wastage of GRPs. So again, that sort of progressively grows. As more people go over the frequency, more GRPs tend to be, being wasted, if you like. So in this particular campaign, once you got up to 14 or 15 weeks, you're talking about sort of 50 or 60% of those GRPs on TV were being wasted or unproductive. Hence the whole idea of being able to optimize your media in terms of working out how heavily you support each media to drive individual brand metrics. So in summary, 3 learnings to take away. First of all, absolutely, there's the multiple channels should be used to maximize campaign effect. I've given you examples here. There's also an example from North Asia as well, that there are synergies to be created once you understand which media drives which metric. Learning number 2, and this is not just from the case study, this is probably some of the broader findings that Millward Brown can bring to the table in terms of TV learnings. TV in most cases is the most effective media, but once you talk about it from a dollar-for-dollar basis, it's not necessarily the most efficient. So there tends to be a lot of overexposure and wastage. Okay? Learning 3, and again, this is a bit of a sort of a truism across these studies, is that online is the most efficient medium and can generally sustain more weight. And online is particularly powerful in terms of driving brand awareness, top end of the purchase funnel, driving awareness and also consideration. And it works very well in synergy with TV. Okay, so I'm hoping, giving you that really quick overview in terms of cross-media, the cross-media case study, there's some learnings in there that might challenge what you're thinking currently or reinforce your thinking around how to optimize multimedia campaigns. Okay, thank you.